Hi everyone, welcome. I'm just going to give a few minutes for people to start coming into the session. I know we have a number of people signed up for today, so excited that everybody's joining us. I'll just wait a minute or two before, like I said, before we jump into it. Sorry if you hear the siren behind me right now, but
No, surprisingly, can't hear it at all.
good. Because I know a lot of times when you're coming into Teams, if you don't have the app, you have to approve that we're recording and all of that, all of those things. So just giving everybody a minute or two for that. Right. I think we can jump into it. It's a couple minutes after the hour. I don't want to keep anybody later on the back end of this. So just first of all, like I said, welcome and thank you. I'm Scott Fischetti from Geopath, and I'm here as always with Brian Schopper from
Hey, everyone.
Geopath as well. So just want to say thank you again for attending. I'm just going to adjust my screen a little bit so I'm not looking awkwardly at everybody. All right. So the last handful of these sessions, we've made them for members only. So, and I think everybody who is currently in the session is a member. And basically all we're asking is just, we typically would post these on our website, our webinars, but if you have team members who want to join but couldn't, reach out to us. We can send you a link post session to this, and there'll be a password that you can go in. I'm sure eventually we will again post these to our website. But for just as we were going through the initial launch of the data set, and it was in a preview state, we wanted to keep these more for our members' benefit than anything else. And that said, hopefully you've been joining along the way, but if you haven't, I just want to let you know that there's a whole set of resources that you can go to in terms of FAQs, one pagers, et cetera. We'll talk about that at the end of the session, but we've also been doing a series of webinars to go along with the progression of the launch of this 2025 data set. So kicked it off. The data set came out as a preview data set on the 15th of September. We had the town hall webinar with Rob Peterson, who's our interim president, as well as Ali Brobeck, and who's our chair, and then some other members of the executive committee. So just talking about the process of getting to that release and the process of Geopath, how we've been evolving over the last year or so. And then Brian and I came back on October 9th and did a little bit of a deeper dive to what they talked about on the 25th session. So went into, and we'll cover a little bit today as a refresh and a review in case you weren't there. But just again, the process we go through when we develop a data set, how this one was unique compared to the previous few years, and then what changed, why it matters. We did a deep dive in this session. Today we'll do it at a high level. And then a few weeks ago, we did another session we call the Guide to Understanding the Impression Update. So what we did here, again, covered a little bit of what we did in the previous session, but added to it in the sense of showing, we used some real live examples of Geopath frames in our database or units in our database, and just talked about kind of how these changes are impacting and what does that mean towards impressions and things like that. But we got a lot of great feedback on this one. So I think if you want to watch any of them, you can watch this one, or I'd say this one and getting to know the data set are probably the two most beneficial to date. And then today we're going to culminate it in, okay, great. Talked about how we developed it, how it's impacting impressions. And now that it's the default data set as of yesterday, hopefully you all saw that notice we sent out and the notices leading up to it. So it is in the Insight Suite as the default data set. And we'll talk about, well, what does that mean? How do you access it? How to use it? And answer any questions anybody might have as we go along. So I guess I kind of teased a little bit of this already. So we're going to talk about today is Just our process. I'm going to go through it at a high level, maybe a little bit faster than I've done on other sessions, because this is probably the third or fourth time we've gone through it. But again, talk about that. And then also, like I said, Brian will jump in and we'll give a demo of the Insight Suite. This won't be so much of a one-on-one on the Insight Suite. It will be really more focused on the accessing the data in Dataset, looking at the data itself. There's some examples we'll show you how the reach has changed and things like that. So, but again, ask any questions as we go along. We'll do our best to answer the questions in the moment, so they're kind of more relevant as to what's on the screen. I don't know, Brian, is there anything else that I should mention? There's
Yeah,
Q&A
the only other
widget
thing I wanted
for
to
questions.
add around questions and around that kind of support, please use the Q&A widget in Teams here to send in any questions. And like Scott said, we'll try to get to them live, but we can always get back to you after the fact if it's something we can't get to live. And as Scott mentioned, we're not going to be doing so much of a 101 of the Insight Suite today. This is more specifically framed around the new data set. But if you or your team does need a 101 session, you can always reach out to us and we'd be happy to set that up for you, and get your team trained on using the Insight Suite. So feel free to reach out to us after the fact, and we'll have at the end our sort of help desk email so you can reach out.
Great. Awesome. All right. So the 2025 planning data sets and key improvements and why they matter. So I want to kind of begin at the beginning, so to speak. So when our process for getting to ratings, right? Impressions, reach, frequency, it all starts here on this left side. So think about the world outside this window, right? There's a road network, right? There's roads, and we have to have a digital version of that, which we do. And then there's inventory on those roads. So this is a very key part of what we do. We couldn't do anything else that's going to come to the right of this unless we had an audited database of inventory. And if you've dealt with the operations team, Kevin Romero or Brian Rue or Katie Casey, Tangia, any of the people on that team, you know that they're looking at the inventory, in particular the roadside inventory. Each person looks at it individually, and we look at all the assignments, we look at the angle to the road, we look at the illumination. There's multiple factors that go into plays in terms, as well as with bus side and even place-based as well. So that's the key part of where we start from. We have an audited database, and that is on the road network. Okay, so then we need to understand all the people moving on that. So in cars, on sidewalks, people, pedestrians, as well as vehicular. And so we work with our partners at Bentley Systems to get that circulation. MotionWorks provides the circulation that we use for place-based inventory, but for the roadside, and that plays into the scheduled fleet, we're working with Bentley to get that foundational circulation number. And then we need to also understand speed. How fast are people moving in cars or on sidewalks? So that is also part of the data that comes to us from Bentley. And then we also need to understand the trips that people take and their home locations, right? In terms of home location, not every trip starts from your home, right? I've taken 3 trips already today. I left my home, came to work, I walked out, got some lunch, and I came back. So 2 of those trips did not originate from my home. But we need to understand the home location so we can tie it back to all the demographics that go along with it. And so we're looking at neighborhood sized block, we call census block. You can think about it as a neighborhood to understand demographics. And then as those people move out and take trips, we're using that information to understand and create impressions. At this point right here, we're essentially looking at a modified OTS, right? We're accounting for some aspects of directionality, illumination, etc. But then we apply our visibility adjustment, which brings us to more of an LTS plus metric, so to speak. If you're looking at the new MRC guidelines, I think we're kind of considered more audience at that top tier. And then we also use that data to apply a reach and frequency modeling. And then that's what you see in the Insight Suite. So this is the process we go when we're looking at when we talk about an annual data set. And monthly, what we're doing, we need to have a way for people when they build a new unit or a new member comes to get the information into our system. So each month, we're having a monthly release. And what that really means is, if you see our monthly release notes, what that means is that that's how we add new or updated inventory. Nothing, if it's in the system already, it's likely not changing. It's only that new inventory that changes monthly, anything new coming into the system. But we do we go through this process annually to go from, refresh the data to get the 2025 data set. And we'll do this again in 2026 as well. But looking from 2019 to 2023, this process was a bit different. We were using what was called for our road network, the HERE network, right? And it wasn't a very flexible network for us. And as such, we also ran into the pandemic and some other things. So, and as such, the road network, as well as the circulation, were pretty static from 2019 to 2023. So we weren't able to update that. What we were able to do was update with, you can see the trip information from MotionWorks, and that helped us to bring it from that foundational circulation data to recency. So as we've been using that term, so bring it to a more contemporary time period for us. And we were always updating the demographics. And again, we say this so you can have the context for why we're so excited about the 2025 data set, not to kind of relitigate the past, but really to set that foundation. And it really helps when we look at what's in the Insight Suite right now. And then 2024 was even more different. It was decided by our leadership at the time and our advisory groups to only update new inventory going into the system. So only and we received emails at times, with questions like, well, 2023 numbers seem similar to 2024. Yes, for the most part, largely they were. And that was to allow us the ability to have the time to do what we've done. And that is, we've updated everything. We have a brand new road network that's going to be more flexible. It's an open source road network. So it allows us the flexibility when new roads are built, when bridges are moved. Well, I make that as a joke, but we had an example where literally a bridge was moved over that time period, and things like that. So it allows us to have that more contemporary road network, as well as to update the circulation, which is a key foundational aspect of what we do every year. So we have the most contemporary data that we need to do our measurement. And so essentially, pretty much everything has changed this year from 2024 to 2025. So it gets really hard. It's almost like apples and oranges to compare the old measurement to the new. It's much more refined. It's much more granular, and we think it's among the best data sets that we produce. Not that, again, did feel it was bad. It just gets more and more accurate over time because the data gets more and more accurate over time for us. So that is the process we've gone through. And like I said, we've updated everything for this year. So what changed and why it matters, and then we'll jump into the Insight Suite and kind of show you the data. So as I mentioned already, the road network, which was a key aspect for us. It's like I said, I don't know if I did say this, it's OpenStreetMaps is the network that we're using, but it is an open source network. So again, that's hopefully going to provide us the long-term flexibility we need as we start to kind of use this over the years and new roads are built or new roads are changed, etc. We've also updated our reach and frequency model. Again, now having this more contemporary data, but also the model itself has been has been refreshed, and as well as accounting better for geodispersion and some things like that. And we'll talk about this, and we did go more in depth in some of these things in previous webinars. And then I think Brian will touch on a little bit when he's going through his part of the session in the on the using the Insight Suite. Also, our place-based methodology has been improved, again, working with our partners at MotionWorks in terms of the accuracy of the activity trends and the stability overall of the audience demography. That was a key thing for us as well. And we also were able to update the transit ridership. For us, if you do have any transit station inventory, you'll know that that's under a place-based methodology as well. Another aspect, and again, this goes to the fact of the increased granularity of our data, accuracy as well. Many more vehicular sources for us, so segments as we would call them. I think it went from a couple 100,000 to 2.2 million, and also more 9 times pedestrian reference sources as well. I think that went from a couple thousand to about 24-ish, plus or minus 1,000. And then just in general, as I've been saying, just that leads to an overall improved precision and accuracy for traffic volumes, occupancy, speeds overall. All of those things really play an important role into us understanding the visibility adjustment metrics as well as kind of ultimate impression. So all of that has been improved and refined from 2024 to 2025. And again, that's why we're super excited and been doing a lot to make sure everybody's aware of all the changes that happened from previous iterations to this 2025 data set. And if there aren't any questions, I'm going to hand it off to Brian, and he'll start to show you a few, obviously where to access the data in the Insight Suite, but also a few interesting features that we think would be really helpful as you're using the Insight Suite, and maybe even a sneak peek at a new one if we have time.
One thing I do is, Scott, if you could go back to
Yes.
that slide with all 5 of those. One thing I just want to anchor on that I think is worth reiterating. GeoPath's measurement is an iterative process, always improving upon the previous version. And just something to keep in mind, as Scott sort of said a little bit before, just because things are different in the version today than they were in the previous version doesn't mean that the previous versions were incorrect. It just means that we have fewer assumptions that we're working with, greater fidelity of the sources that we're using. And as with any iterative process, you would hope that the next iteration is always better than the previous. So just something to keep in mind, that there are so many things that have changed here that, and Scott said, it's a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison, just in the amount of distance we've covered and how much we've changed from 24 to 25. So just a couple of things to keep in mind.
Yeah. And just because that maybe the impression was maybe different than 2024, it doesn't mean the effectiveness of that inventory in the physical world has changed at all. That inventory is still as effective as it was. We just have a better sense of what the impressions are. And if one of the other webinars, I kind of likened it to the weather, right? We used to know, hey, it's cold out. And then eventually we knew, well, it's freezing, and freezing is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And now we know even better that it's, 28.7 degrees Fahrenheit. In all 3 of those scenarios, you still need a coat. You still know it's cold out there. So it's kind of the same thing. We've just gotten better and better and more precise, and we will continue to get more precise over time. So I can see Brian has the Insight Suite up, and I'll let you jump in and start talking about it.
Sounds good. So a couple things just right off the bat. So Scott mentioned this, but as of yesterday, November 17th, the 2025 data set is now the default data set in the Insight Suite. And for any API users who may be on the call as well, or anyone who works with their internal API teams or GeoPath's API, all of the defaults have now switched over to 2025. So if you don't specify a data set in the API or also in the Insight Suite. If you don't specifically specify, as of yesterday, they're all going to be set to 2025. So that being said, I kind of went through and just set this backward to 2024 just so you could see just kind of mechanically how to switch this. So in the Explore module here, you'll notice in the top left corner, you have this data source dropdown. And so again, when you all log in today, you'll see this current refresh May 2025. You'll see that set already when you log in. But just for example's sake, if I were to switch between 2024, you can see I've got 24 applied here. I can simply just click it and hit apply. And you'll actually notice, I'll go back and do it again, but you'll notice right away the count of spots change and also the overall metrics in this right-hand corner change. And that's because the inventory database that is included in either dataset is slightly different, as well as all of these updated metrics. So you can see we've got about 1.61 million spots, and I think it's about 1.63 when we switch over to 2025. So, and also when you're in here, you'll see data source, oops, okay, all good. You'll see data source 2025-0501, that's the API name, but you'll see that along the bottom there. So at a very, very high level, that is how you set up the in the Explore module, at least that's how you switch over to 2025. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a refresh. Like Scott said, and like we mentioned earlier, not necessarily a 101 of how to use the Insight Suite. We're happy to set that up for you, but just a couple of things that I think are worth discussing while we're here, and I'll show some things in the workspace module as well, how you can make use of 24 and 25 potentially. So for example, let's just take a look over here. I'm just going to, the example that I'm going to do today is in the Philadelphia DMA. So just for example's sake, I just want to take a second to talk through the assign market function. And if anyone has basically ever been on an Insight Suite walkthrough with me, you've probably heard me talk through this, but I think it's a really valuable piece to cover. And I think that this is honestly, this understanding of audience versus inventory market is really core to just understanding Geopath's metrics in general. So in this example, I've got the Philadelphia DMA selected as my market. The primary function of the assign market selection here, this actually is first selecting my audience base of people, my target audience, or I guess target audience, but specifically my audience base. I think this is a little bit counterintuitive because the first thing you might think when you're going to assign your market is that you're filtering for inventory in a particular market. And you can definitely do that with this, but actually the primary function that the assign market is doing is selecting my in-market audience of people. So in this case, if I'm selecting the Philadelphia DMA and I hit add, you'll actually see there's this pop-up that shows up here. And basically what this is asking me is if I also want to take that same market selection and apply it as a filter for my inventory. In most cases, you'll probably do this. You'll probably say yes to this and set your audience base and your inventory selection as the same market. In theory, you could do, some out of market targeting using this if you were to say no. But basically, by saying yes, I'm setting my audience base as those that physically live within the Philadelphia DMA. And I'm also, by clicking yes, I'm setting my inventory selection for that same DMA. And the reason that I'm so specifically calling that out, and like I said, if you've ever been on a call with me, you've probably heard me say almost verbatim that same thing. The reason that I call that out so much is because that understanding of in-market audience or audience base in general is really key to understanding all of the metrics that you're going to deal with going forward. So when you're looking at, so for example, as this loads up, you can see I've got my total base impressions and base and market impressions, target and market impressions. Anywhere you see in market, that is going to be reflective of whatever audience market I've just applied. So in this case, my in-market audience and in-market impressions, in-market everything else is all based on people who physically live within this Philadelphia DMA. That same thing is really key for reach and frequency metrics. The in-market audience or the audience base is effectively, it's the denominator of people that you are attempting to reach. Like if you're trying to get a 30% reach against a particular audience, your audience base, your in-market audience is that sort of lowest denominator of people that you're starting with. If I'm setting the Philadelphia DMA, my in-market audience is the Philadelphia DMA, and then say I were to do persons 18 to 34 on top of that, I'm still only looking to people within the Philadelphia DMA. if you're API users, there's a bit of a relationship with this as well, the target geography and inventory market. I just want to make a few minutes to point out that inventory market and your selection of where your audience market is are kind of distinct things, but they're both very important. So a little bit of a long-winded way to say, I'm now looking at inventory within the Philadelphia DMA, but more importantly, my audience metrics are against the people that physically live within this DMA. Going forward from there, so I haven't selected a specific target audience yet. And it was maybe about a year ago, maybe a little longer, that we introduced this feature. But let's say, for example, I wanted to target maybe persons 25 to 54 as an example, and let's also say males 25 to 54. So you can see, and this only applies when you're in the population level audiences here, but you can see I have this modified base segment option. By default, when you're in the Insight suite, your base audience is set to person 0 plus, truly all persons, regardless of DMA, or sorry, regardless of specific audience demographic or anything like that. So it's sort of the full population when you have person 0 plus as your base. But let's say, for example, and I think the most likely use case would be perhaps like an alcohol campaign, or in certain markets like a cannabis campaign, there may be certain instances where you need to ensure that, say, 80% of your overall audience is 21 plus at least. Ideally, I think they prefer, more than 80%, but say you need to ensure, okay, we're only targeting persons 21 plus at our base level, and then specifically males 25 to 54 on top of that. What you can do using this modified base segment here, you can click this. Oops. Hold on. I think something's going on with the share window. One sec. Sorry. Something's clicking strange. Let me apply that, see if that'll let me apply it, and then I'll see if I can change it. Yeah, I think my trackpad is not working. I'll have to check on that. But either way, in theory, you can change the base segment that underlies this audience selection to say like persons 21 plus, and so then you're only looking at people 21 plus, and then you have a target audience on top of that. So just something to keep in mind. Hopefully you have better luck with it if you're working with it. So let me just zoom in. Actually, I have there's a whole lot of inventory here. I'm gonna keep moving with this so I can go over to the workspace module and basically just kind of do a scenario there. But I actually have an inventory set that I've saved in the past. And there's actually kind of a good reason that I'm using this inventory set. But let me just go in here. Just for anyone who is using the Insight Suite and you're not necessarily, maybe you don't use inventory sets often, or you're not quite sure where they are. So in the filter inventory tab here, these are all different ways that I can use to filter down this group of 53,000. If you have specific IDs, you can paste those in here as well. But within this specific ID section, you can see I have this load saved inventory sets option. So this one, I think it's Philadelphia DMA example or something like that. Yeah, Philadelphia DMA example inventory set. So I'm just going to apply that. And basically an inventory set is just a collection of spots that I've saved to my account at one point in the past. And I can now more easily call them back up, and I can use this to run reports and things like that. So inventory sets, just as a general bit of guidance, the inventory sets are really helpful, especially if you're comparing multiple packages, maybe a few different packages for a particular campaign that you're considering. But you can see here, I've got this package of 45 spots. It's a mix of, so the green here is street furniture. It's some newsstands. I think there's some transit shelters in here, and also a couple bulletin spots. So 45 spots, we've got them in this Philadelphia area. There's one thing I want to show you kind of quick before I jump over and manually set up a workspace module. And I've actually gotten a question about this in the last couple months. I've gotten questions about this, and I think it's actually a worthwhile feature to discuss here. So let's say that you spend some time in the tool here in the Explore module, and I've got this filter down to 45 spots. I've got a target audience selected. Let's say, for example, I wanted to put this for 4 weeks. So by default, everything's at 1 week. But scheduled delivery, I can change this to 4 weeks here, and then all the metrics will update to reflect 4 weeks. But let's say you've got basically everything set up in here as you would want it to run like a campaign. So one of the ways that you can actually do this and basically bridge the gap between the Explore module and running something as a campaign in Workspace is you can actually do this save as here and then save as scenario. And so it'll give you two options. You can do as a market plan, but in this case, more importantly, I would want to set this as an inventory plan. And I'll do this manually in just a minute. But basically, if you were working in Explore and you had the audience, the time frame, the market, if you have basically everything you would want for a campaign report set up, you can save as a scenario, save it to an inventory plan, and then basically just generate it with all the filters and all the parameters that you already have applied. And you can edit them later on and make tweaks and all that. But I just find this to be a little bit of a helpful bridge in a way between Explore and Workspace if you're just trying to make it a little bit more seamless from one to the other. Any just pause for a second. Any questions or anything?
Sorry, none yet.
Okay, cool. All right, so let me head over to the Workspace module. So again, just to reiterate, really the only thing in Explore that you'll need to do, or maybe not even need to do because it's the default, but if you're looking to switch data sets in Explore, it's tucked in that right-hand corner under data source. So let me head over to Workspace. I'm just going to go in my sandbox here, just as a general bit of sort of guidance here when you're in Workspace. And there's a couple features in here that we have internally at Geopath that you may not see on your account, but we've got a sandbox area and then we've got projects. And effectively, the projects are a bunch of different, effectively like folders that have a bunch of plans within them. And the sandbox is essentially one large folder. You can see some of these things I've put names on, some of them don't have names. You can always rename things later or move them around. But just for example's sake, if you're trying to just run a report and you want to get some numbers pretty quickly, I'd recommend just placing it in your sandbox and hitting add scenario. So in this case, I'm not going to focus too much on a market plan, but I do want to just show while we're in here, if you are going to add an audience to either a market plan or an inventory plan, you can select the audience, and within this selection module for audience, this is where you would specifically switch between 2024 and 25. So I can switch to 24, hit apply, and I should mention also, all of the audiences that are in 2024 are also in 2025. So they're anything that you were able to run against in 24, you should be able to do in 25 as well. So again, you can just switch between those here in market plan. The same is true in inventory plan, but I'll do that in just a second. So in this case, I'm just going to start with my inventory selection. And again, if you've ever been on like a walkthrough with me, you may have heard me recommend starting this way because I think this can be a helpful way to sort of make this process a little bit quicker. So I've got this Philadelphia DMA. I believe this is the one. Philadelphia DMA, yeah, example inventory set. So I'm going to hit apply selections. And when you're adding an inventory set or in here and you've pasted a bunch of IDs, for example, you'll get this pop-up that asks you if you want to auto apply the market selection. So I know in this case, all of these spots are grouped within a singular DMA. They're all within the Philadelphia DMA. So I'm going to select DMA and hit add as individual. But if you're ever confused about, I'm not sure where my spots are or how I want to do this way, you can always hit cancel auto sign and then just manually select your market. But I'll hit DMA, add as individual, and you'll see now, not only is my targeted market, again, my audience market, my audience base, people who live in the Philadelphia DMA, but my inventory set includes my Philadelphia DMA right here. So I like to start with my inventory selection because it kind of satisfies a couple of these requirements all at once.
One thing,
but like I
do you
said,
mind if I jump in quick, Brian?
Yeah, sure.
One thing I wanted to say just about that feature that I really like, when you can drop in a set of inventory and it could be from across different DMAs, and if you do click that, if you do click the add as individual,
yes,
it'll sniff out and put it in the appropriate DMAs for you all. So
yes,
that's a really helpful feature if you're doing multi-market stuff and you just have a collection of Geopath IDs or media owner IDs.
Yeah, and I haven't personally bumped into the limit of that yet. You can do several thousand spots at a time. I wouldn't go crazy with it, but if you have spots across, like Scott said, several DMAs, you can paste it all in, and the tool is smart enough to know, okay, this is in the Philadelphia DMA, this is in Detroit, and it'll split them all out. So I've added my inventory set. I auto-assign the market. Let's say this is a 4-week campaign. You could also set this for generic, or sorry, for specific dates, but I'll say this is a standard 4 weeks. And the point that I really wanted to show here was when you're in the audience selection, by default, this will have person 0 plus added, or all persons. So I'm just going to remove that because I'm going to add a couple others. So I'm going to switch this back to 2024, and I just kind of want to show this for example's sake. So when you're in the tool here, same thing in market plan and same thing in inventory plan. So let's say I'm just looking at kind of a broad audience, like persons 18 plus, and I can add selected. So you can see I've got 2024 as the data set and person 0 plus. Let me just see. Modify base segments give me trouble there too. So I've got my 2024 selected. Let's say I were to switch back over to 2025. It keeps whatever I've added already. So I can keep my 2024 audience. And let's say I wanted to look at the same thing against 2025. Maybe, and I could think as like a use case, maybe there's an instance where you might be running a certain audience. Maybe it's like I got myself, damn it. That didn't necessarily make sense what I was going to say. So let's say, for example, you've got 2024 and 2025 of the same audience. I mentioned a little bit earlier, and I'm just going to add those. I mentioned a little bit earlier that there was a reason that I chose this specific inventory set and that I'm using this. So this was actually I'll generate this and I'll sort of talk through it as it's going, but this was a user submitted set of inventory, or a set that we had sort of in testing identified as an example, and as an example of sort of a bad behavior or something we wanted to address for. So one of the things that's perfect. Okay. So one of the things in the improvements to the 2025 reach and frequency model was that there may have been instances where, and in this set is this inventory set is a particular example, where say you're adding spots to your plan, like from 10 to 20 to 30, and you were adding, and as the spots incrementally got bigger, the reach may have at a certain point deflected or dipped rather than grown incrementally as you might expect. That adjusting for that specific behavior is one of the key things that's in this 2025 reach frequency model, ensuring that additional spots always result in additional incremental reach or frequency. Same thing with like if your time frame, like a 4-week plan should always have larger reach or frequency than say a 2-week plan. It also is supposed to scale logically with audience base sizes and audiences. So consistency adjustments for that kind of thing are now much more heavily considered in the 2025 reach and frequency. And so you can see that's a little bit of a preamble to this. So I've got, again, my 2024 audience listed here first, 2025, same audience. You can see these are the same 45 units on both plans. And so you can see the overall impression levels and also slightly higher reach in 2025. So this, if I were to go and look through this, I may still see that dip in 2024 because this is one of those examples. But you can see that that's not necessarily the case here. And also, as I was looking through this, interesting, and I suppose this makes sense based on the inventory itself in this plan, there's actually a higher frequency than there was reported last year, in addition to a higher reach. And I believe, this kind of makes sense given how tightly grouped a lot of those transit shelters and those benches were. Generally speaking, street furniture is very conducive to high frequency plans, just by the nature of the way people commute and travel. They're usually taking the same routes to work every single week, so you tend to get a lot of repeat frequency on people who are using transit shelters or interacting with them rather. But so this is one I wanted to point out, that you can add multiple audiences to a plan in general, but also multiple audiences from differing data sets. As Scott mentioned, there are a lot of things, and as we've kind of been saying in this whole series here, there are a lot of things that have changed between 2024 and 2025. So they're not directly an apples to apples comparison with each other, just something to keep in mind as you're looking through. But if you are looking to compare multiple audiences or, like I said, different data sources within a single plan, you can do that and set this up. And then if I were to expand either of these, I can then look at the spot by spot level metrics for all of these as well. One thing I will mention, and I'm just kind of in my walkthrough mode here as I'm talking through this. So when you're going to export, you'll get effectively the same data out of the CSV or the Excel export Sometimes people ask about this, what's the benefit of one or the other? It's really just formatting. So the CSV export, if you have multiple sub plans like this, so I have two audiences, each is sort of a sub plan within the plan. If I were to export as CSV, I'll get a zipped folder with two different CSV files. If I do the Excel export, I get basically just one folder one Excel file that has a summary tab that basically looks exactly like this with all the campaign level metrics, and then on the next tab over, you get a spot by spot level readout with the different audiences sort of horizontally laid out. So it's kind of a preference thing. If you like having the audiences separately in separate files, CSV might be helpful. Excel might be helpful. And one other thing I always like to mention, your plans are not static once you've run them. You can always come back in here in this parameters slider and change any piece of this plan. Any parameter you can change, any parameter that you could do on setup, you can change at any point. So if you're looking to tweak things around or try different things out, never be afraid to just make changes. And you can also make copies of things. Like if I were to go back here, maybe I wanted to duplicate this and then make a copy of it and make some tweaks. So I had the original version and then a new version. And this kind of, I think that's a majority of it. This kind of brings me to the last thing I wanted to cover here. Anything you wanted to, like, any questions or anything before we keep going?
No questions yet.
Okay.
Definitely feel free to ask.
Yeah. Yep. So the last thing that we wanted to show, and you may have seen it on my screen already. It's kind of up there already. But basically, this is a feature that we've had sort of in development in the background for a little while, something that people have been asking for quite a while. And so coming somewhat soon, hopefully, we have to figure that part out, I suppose. But we have been able to build in the ability here to share plans from within your own account to other accounts. So let's say, for example, and you can see I have this shared group here. These are all the ones that have been shared with me or that I have shared. So once you have this feature rolled out to your own accounts, you'll have next to Sandbox and projects, you'll have this shared view. But within a plan, let's say I was, this one I was just looking at. Let's say I wanted to share scenario. So basically, you'll have three overall options. I think three. Yes. So don't share, only visible to me. That's basically as it is right now, just exists within your account. You can also share with your organization. So share with everyone at my organization, or you can share with another member organization. So let's say, you're working on some standard packages. Maybe there's an operator who has a few standard packages for like fleet or something. They would, in theory, then be able to say, okay, here are all the agency members that we want to send this to, and XYZ King package, 50 TRPs, whatever it is, and you can share it with any specific member accounts that you want here. Right now, this is limited to the sort of full organization, but this, in theory, will allow a lot more of that. I don't know, a lot more collaboration in a general sense. I think that that's honestly, even beyond just sharing, within your own organization. If Scott and I are working on something together, I can just share this and then we can pick it up right from there. But it does allow for external sharing, all sort of within GeoPath's membership. So still not quite available to everybody yet, but something exciting coming down the path for that.
Yep, yeah, and I think this will be a great. We're giving you all a sneak peek. We're still testing and working on it, but we thought given, like Brian said, it was something that's been asked for a while now, and we're excited to get it out there into the insights. We wanted to share it with y'all just to let you know it's coming. So
absolutely, I think that is probably it on my end. Should we jump back into the?
I do want to jump into the deck, but there's one feature if you can just show super quickly, because I think it's a really interesting feature, and I know we've done a webinar on it a while back, but in the workspace module, and if you just call up one of those plans that you had, just the include and exclude feature, because I think this is also a really helpful feature that you could use. For example, if you are trying to run a market plan and you just know there's sets of inventory that are firmed out that you don't even want to include in the market plan. You don't want to use that in your calculation because you know there's no way they're going to be bought, or you know a client always wants these certain sets of units, you know, certain spots. You can include or exclude and force it to, you know, include these spots in a plan or force it to exclude the spot in a plan. It's a really nice feature that, you know, I don't know if everybody is always aware of it, but I think it's a really important and could be a super helpful feature for people.
Definitely. Here, I'm
And
just
I'll
kind of
just say
setting up. I
really
didn't have
quick.
any nearby ones that I thought would work, so I'm just kind of setting up like a general plan here, just kind of a market plan as I would set it up. So let's say, for example, like as Scott mentioned, here I'll make this like a 4-week plan, and let's say we're looking for, yeah, I'll leave it at the default of 200 TRPs. Let's say, for example, I've got this plan in Philadelphia, 18 to 34 target audience. And so in this plan, I'm including posters and transit shelters. And so in the same place in the plan setup, and you can do this separately, it's kind of why I did this first, and then I'm coming back in here. You can, in the media selection here, down here at the bottom, include or exclude spots. So as Scott mentioned, if you know there are perms that are not available, they're sold out for an entire year, and you don't want to include them, like, you know, there's these couple posters, we already have those sold, don't include this in the average calculations because they're not viable. So let's paste the IDs here, and okay, these 15 poster spots won't be included. On the flip side of that, say there are, and this could be really useful if you are, you know, combining maybe a fleet and a roadside plan or something like that. But let's say there are a handful of spots that you know these definitively are going to be in this campaign. We know, you know, these maybe 5 bulletin spots are already included, and we're maybe looking to fill out the rest of this plan with some transit shelters and some posters. You can paste these 5 in here, paste 5 IDs or whatever the IDs are, paste them in here and hit include spots.
Mhm.
The one thing I will mention, and this is just a little bit of a usability thing here. If you are going to include or I suppose this only matters really for include. If you're going to include spots in your plan, I would just make sure that they are either one of the media types you've already selected, or you need to then go add for that media type so you can include the count of it. So say, for example, I knew there were 5 bulletin spots I was going to include, and then so I have my posters, my transit shelters. I'm going to fill it out with posters and transit shelters, but I know the couple bulletins I'm going to use. I could go in, put in my bulletin spots here, and then once the plan runs, I can go and make tweaks on the individual numbers of spots.
Mhm.
So it's okay, 5 bulletins, the 5 I know that I'm going to include, and fill out the rest with posters and transit shelters. Just a little bit of a tip there for the usability. If you're going to include, you do need to include the media type specifically in the media selection. I
Right.
don't believe exclude works that same way. I think you can just paste the IDs and it already knows to exclude them.
Yeah. Well, you're automatically excluding them because they're not part of your plan anyway. The
That's
media
true.
type
That's
is
true.
not part of your plan. But you could also too do both, like to use both scenarios together in a sense, like you know a client always buys a certain set of posters, great, but I also know a certain set of inventory is permed out, great. So include those, exclude those, and then run it. So I think it helps make market plans even more useful for everyone when they're doing that. So just a little feature we wanted to make sure everybody was aware of. I know we're getting close. We're about 10 minutes out. So I just wanted to, I'll jump back into the deck, and there's just a handful of slides that I want to share. And then if there are any other questions, and Brian and I can hang on and answer any other thoughts that you might have. But oops, I gotta get over there. Sorry, my okay, cool. So kind of like the so what. So just jumping back to, we talked about kind of what's new in the 2025 data set. So if anybody's asking you, or a client and is asking you about what's different or why my impressions change, it's just some key high level talking points, right? So, just the new data set is updated data sources, more better roadway segments, more refined data set models in terms of reach and frequency and even place-based analytics. So just overall more enhanced measurement accuracy, but also the point I was mentioning earlier, right?
Sorry. There we
Oh,
go.
I'm sorry. I totally forgot to, my bad. Forgot to, yep. Teams is a little bit different like that, so my apologies. I forgot to share that screen. But yeah, so the measurement accuracy, and also, like I said earlier, like the effectiveness of the inventory has not changed, right? Our data sets are more contemporary. We have a better understanding of delivering the audience, but the inventory itself remains as effective as in previous years. So if you need help with that discussion, we're here. We're happy to help. Always reach out to Brian or myself or Luke. I'm sure a lot of you know as well. Or you can also reach out to geekout@geopath.org as well. We are having another session before the end of the year. So on December 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern time, we'll send an invite, announcement on this so you can register if you want for this session. So this will be more of a roundup of all the sessions we've done to date. Maybe not so much a deep dive on the Insight Suite, but more on the couple 2 to 3 previous sessions where we talked about kind of our overall process, got a little bit deeper on what changed and why it mattered, and then also maybe going through some of the examples of how those changes impact the inventory specifically. So I think this will be a great session if you haven't been able to attend any of the other ones. And also want to make sure everybody's aware of the other set of materials we have to support this launch. So there's a comprehensive FAQ doc. It's 4 or 5 pages long, a set of commonly asked questions. There is also what changed and why it matters. It's a 2-pager instead of a 1-pager. So much changed, it went over the 2 pages. But it's essentially a distilled version of the FAQ at some level. And then there's a reach frequency 1-pager, which Brian started to hit on some of those points already, but there's that. And then if you don't like the 1-pagers, you can just watch a couple of short tutorial videos that we recorded, just talking about some of these changes, one specifically for the higher level changes, and then one for the reach and frequency. And then this last thing is a note to the industry. So if you're getting questions from clients or anything like that, this is something you could share with them that essentially speaks to the fact that, the inventory has not changed in effectiveness. It's really the methodology and the input data that's improved. So it could be something if you want to or need to, you can share with clients. This note is also as the lead page in the FAQ doc as well. So it's in a couple of places. And you can get at this stuff either in the Geek Out library, the Learning Lab, or it's also on the Insight Suite as well. When you log in, the landing page you log into, you can click on and get to these materials as well. So that's about what we wanted to cover today. Brian, was there anything
Yeah,
you wanted to add or any questions?
well, there was actually one question, I guess kind of 2 questions that are somewhat similar here. I'm just going to quickly share my screen again back over to the tool.
Perfect.
Let me see. Here we go. So this is, I just pulled back up the example we were just working with earlier. And the questions are effectively, how can I understand changes to impressions, reach and frequency, if I'm looking at either different spot lengths or more than one spot on a digital frame? Both really good questions. So for all digital units in the system, just about, yeah, for all digital roadside units, I'll say at least, there is a frame ID for all the spots on that frame. And say if there is like a digital bulletin board that has 8 individual ads on it, 8 different flips, as you might call them. Each of those digital spots has its own spot ID. So if you were in theory trying to see, okay, what would the plan look like if I were including 2 spots on this frame or 3 spots? One of the ways that you could do that is to just include additional spots from that same digital frame. So just add other spot IDs from that same digital frame onto this plan. Like for example, let's see, this one here, this digital bulletin, there's probably 7 others, if I had to guess, on this frame. So if I wanted to know, okay, well, what would it be like if I were to include 2 spots from this frame rather than 1? I could add another spot from that frame. One of the other ways that you could do this, and this kind of gets to the question of time, like the length of rotation. We don't necessarily have the length of rotation inherent in the system here, but what you can do is you can actually see this spot share of voice feature. So for all the static units, all the non-digital units, you'll see this the share of voice is 100%. Basically, what this means is this spot share of voice, the percentage shown here. This is the percent of overall time that that one spot is
Oh, right.
displayed out of all. Oh,
Sorry, I
I
think
did the same
we
thing.
weren't sharing
Sorry.
the screen. Sorry. The
No,
functionality
it's
of Teams is slightly new to us in terms of webinars, so apologies for that.
it got us both. Sorry. So for this one, this second row down here, one of the ways that you could do this is you could include another digital spot that's also on this frame, and that would effectively be like you are including two spots or one spot of double the length on this plan. The other way that you could do that is this spot share voice. Um, and again, so spot share voice in this case, and this is how I know that there are eight. When there are 8 spots in rotation on a digital frame, each spot is displayed for 12.5% of the time. It's basically just the amount, 100% divided by the number of spots in rotation. So in theory, you could, like if you knew how long this frame was, if this say this was like a 15-second spot and you wanted to understand what a 30-second spot would look like, you could basically go in and type rather than 12 and a half, you could say, okay, what does a 25% share of voice for this particular spot look like? This will effectively get you the output of including 2 spots on that same frame, or if you were to change the spot share of voice and basically affect how long it's displayed overall at 100%, that's another way that you could affect that time displayed on the thing. So kind of addressing like two and a half questions there, but I think that should help get you started. And so once you click out of that, you'll see please regenerate plans, and you can just kind of come over here and you hit this purple recalculate measures button. And the same thing is true. That same behavior is true if you're looking at a plan that's got like custom dates. And if you were to change one of the dates for one of the spots, you'll also see this recalculate measures button. And so it'll then update the spot level and the summary level metrics for whatever changes you've just made. Let me take a quick look.
Well, and as you're looking through the questions again, I can also speak to a couple of them. Question about when the sharing function, we expect that to be available. Don't know specifically yet, but we're trying to get it out before the end of the year, for sure. We will be sending out notices, announcements on it, and we'll probably even do another follow-up webinar so people can see it specifically, and we can focus a little bit more on that and show some examples on how to do that. And then there was an interesting idea about, which we can take back to our product team, about plans to include Excel download that includes both individual by market and group market. So thank you for the thought, and we're always open to any ideas on improved functionality or features that you'd like to see added. You can always send those to geekout@geopath.org. Feel free to do that as well. But I don't know, Brian, as I was talking, are there any other questions that we may have missed or?
I don't think so. Just speaking to that one question, that is a really good question about, the grouped markets and the individual markets. Just to sort of illustrate what that question kind of means, if I were to, let's say I'm making an inventory plan, and I can use, here, let me just do like a county in New York, for example. When you select more than one audience, you'll see you have the option not only to add as individual, but to add as group. And again, because we're selecting markets, and I'm actually glad this came up, because we're selecting markets, and when you see select market, not necessarily inventory filter or filter by location, but select market, this is particularly looking at the audience base of people in being considered in these calculations. So actually, if I were to combine Albany and Allegheny counties here, this is not just going to combine the counts of inventory in those two areas, but this basically looks at these two counties as one collective audience base. Even if they're not next to each other, it would basically look at these as one combined geographical area. So basically, setting that up to explain, when you add something to a group as in your plan, when you add markets as a group, it basically would need to consider them as different market calculation scenarios. Basically, it considers them as inherently different things. So I think that's probably why today there isn't a way to export from the same plan both the grouped and the individual. And to the person's point, you would need to run this as two plans effectively. One where these are combined, and I'm looking at a combined audience, and one where they're separate, where they're run as individual counties. But to Scott's point, that's definitely something we can consider with the product team and see if that's possible. But just the tool is inherently thinking about them as different scenarios, basically, and that's why they would need to be two separate ones for right now, at least.
And then just one last question before we jump off. I know we're at the top of the hour, so if you need to jump, definitely feel free. Thank you for the questions. It's always nice to have the question. Brian, if you could call up. So the question is, will the sharing feature allow us to share live map views? And I would say yes, because it's a feature that's already in inventory plan. Like if you have a plane, you can map it. If I'm not mistaken currently, Brian. So
Yeah.
I would imagine it still allows you to create a map of it, but that's a good question, and we can even test it live with you right here.
Yeah.
Right now.
So this should be.
Yep.
Oh, this is something I was testing yesterday, actually. So if you go and you click that map button within any scenario, but within any market plan scenario, you should then be able to go and here I just clicked map right up top, and it opens as a separate window. Let me give this a second to load up because it's New York, so it will take a minute just because of the density. But yeah, 336 spots. And let me see. Should load up. It's just taking a while. Oh wait, I'm looking at Philadelphia. That's why. These are in New York. Hold on. Yeah, they're there. But yes, so you can then, if you are working on an inventory plan, and to Scott's point, if you are to share an inventory plan with someone, and they receive like, okay, this is what was shared with me. I can hit map, and then within their own account, it would then launch into Explorer and do this. As far as like, we've gotten the question, and I'm not sure if this is kind of what the question is asking as well. There isn't a way to share map like a map export or like a live viewable map out of the tool to non-members. But in theory, this is a way that you could share, with it with your own team or membership or other people among membership, and sort of have this mappable version. But that's how you probably do it: is share an inventory plan, and then you can hit this map button up top.
All right. Well, I know we're a couple minutes after, but thank you for the questions. We're happy to answer any of them. And if you think of something after the session, like email us at geekout@geopath.org. We're happy to answer any questions and help out. Or as Brian said, if you or your team needs wants to set up anything like this, where we go through the insight suite or even do a review of some of the what changed or why it matters, where we're happy to set up any of those sessions as well. So definitely feel free to reach out. And just thank you again for attending and sticking around for the last few extra minutes. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. And just one quick thing, I see there's a question about API access. I'll reach out to you after the fact and get you some info.
Great. Sorry, I missed that one. All right.
Cool.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.